Hello, I'm JohntheFish and I'm going to show you how form reform works. We're on a standard atomic default content install on the contact form page. If I scroll you down here, this is the contact form that Concrete installs by default using the Concrete Express form system, and we're going to replace this with a similar form in form reform. So the first thing we need to do is to go into Edit and get rid of the existing contact form. So here we have a bit of space, and form reform works by adding form blocks to the page. When you install form reform, you get this big section of different form controls. I'm going to start with a text input, and here we're going to add a text input for first name, and we'll put the name also into a placeholder. Something to show you here is we've actually got an input here for the form name, which is called form reform. This is a default value and you can leave it at that if you've only got one form on the page. This is how form reform connects together all the different blocks that make up a form. We're going to require a first name required, and let's have a minimum length of 2 characters and a maximum length of 30, and that's it. Add our first name field to the form. I'm going to jump ahead now and quickly put in the last name, and I'll meet you again halfway through inputting an email field. And one of the things about email is you can give it stronger validation. So we're actually going to test that there's an MX record for the email and strict. So we're checking something about the validity of the email address without actually sending an email to it. So here's our email inputs. Now we need a radio input for the subject of the form. So let's come down here, find a radio input, our radio set. And we're going to lay it out horizontally. We can just add and remove and shuffle fields as we go. Let's jump ahead again here. Here's our subject field. We need the body of the message. This will be a text area. So we've got a longer placeholder, seeing this is a text area. What we're missing, if we go back to the original form, is this text section. And this is one of the great things about form reform, is we can just put in a text section. So here we have our styled content block. Other things we need on our form. We need a submit button. Like everything else in form reform, a submit button is another block. And this is a bit more complex than the other blocks. In fact, it's a lot more complex because the submit button controls the processing of the form. First tab is similar because we've got the form name, the name of the button, a bit of styling of the button. And we come to the pipeline. This is how the form is processed. And you control the pipeline by adding in and shuffling these stages. This is a default pipeline where we check for spam, we validate the inputs. If we're successful, we save it and we put out a message. If we're not successful, we put out an error message. I won't go into the details of all of these. If we look at the save, our forms are all currently called form reform, but we can alias it here, so we can save it to contact. And I'll just show you in the message, we've got a success message, thank you, and we've got this placeholder in the message that dumps out the data of the form. And then the error, if there was an error in the form, we've got an error message, and we dump out the errors nicely formatted. Other things we can put in here, well, there's loads of different save handlers. We can save it to sessions, to cookies, We can send it by email, and you can have multiple copies of this, so you could save it to several different places at the same time. We can log data about the form, we can add extra data, we can remove data. There's loads of different things you can do, but this is all we need for now. So there's our submit button, and the other thing we're going to need is somewhere to display our messages for success or error. So let's come back down here, and we need a form message display block, and all the formatting is controlled by the submit block and the pipeline handlers there. So we'll just add the message block in at the top. So we've got a message block for our response, we've got first name, last name, email, a bit of blurb in a content block, a radio set to tell them what the subject is, and the actual content of the message in our contact form. Let's save that and publish, and here we have our form. Let's fill it in. I'm John. Here's what we're going to talk about. So our form submits. If we scroll down the page, here we have thank you for your submission. All our form fields are still there. We'll do something about that. The other thing we've had to do is scroll down the page. So I don't really want to have to do that all the time after every submission. So let's change a couple of things. Each of these form fields, let's edit it. We've got a behaviour section, and we're not going to bother to show it when a success message is shown. We'll let it show when an error message is shown. We can react to any message states here, and we've got some general purpose states further down for managing multi-step forms, which we won't be talking about further other than to just tell you that they're there. Another thing we've got is picking up initial values. Now, I don't want to have to enter my first name on every form across a site. So if a field's called first name, I'm going to pick it up from anywhere. And let's quickly go through the other fields. I'm going to do the same for last name and email. On the subject, well, we want a different subject every time, so I'm not going to mess with the initial value, but I will hide it when a success message is shown. I'm going to hide the content message when a success message is shown, and I'm going to hide the submit button when a success message is shown. There's a bit more on the success thing. Now, the other thing we've got here is you've got a few extra tabs. We've got one that can tell us how a form's going to be submitted, and we can also add some logging if we wanted to. I'm not going to do that now. We've got some help with placeholders. This is what appears in all the other messages, and we've got some classes help, and here we've got one for when a success message is shown. Now we need this for our content block, so I'm going to copy that and let's save the form. If we go up to our content block, and I'll go into its block design, and we're going to add this class to it. Hide from form reform when success. And we'll save that. And let's publish our form. And because I told it to look for previous populations of these fields, it's gone back through previous submissions of the form and said, okay, we know you're John, we know you're the fish, we know your email address, here it is pre-populated. This form should Ajax submit, and all these form entry blocks will be hidden after it submits successfully. So we'll submit it and off it goes. Input fields and the content block have been hidden, and we've got a thank you message. If I refresh our page now, we'll come back to a fresh form. So what else can I tell you about form reform? Let's have a look at the submissions. Here we have our dashboard page. It's in the report section, and form reform stores submissions all in one table. all your form data is in one nice convenient place. And the way we do that is by serializing the form data into a JSON string. So here's the form data: first name, last name, email, subject and message. Let's go back to our form. Because all our forms are built out of blocks, not only can we mix content blocks and other things in amongst our forms, we can also use layouts to rearrange our form or to organize our form. We can spread forms out all across a web page. We can have them all tied together in one place. We have a whole host of different form controls, and there's more on the way. What I'm going to do now is lay out our form, just to show you the advantage of having a form all in blocks. So we're going to add a layout to our area, and we'll have 3 columns. Let's pull our submit button down first, get it underneath those. A bit of text there, and we'll move the first 3 fields, one into each column. So here we have our rearranged form in a layout. And here we have it. The other thing we can do, well, I mentioned spam checking. So like most things in form reform, spam control is in another block or a series of blocks. We've got some different spam controls. We've got a capture. Now I won't add a capture at the moment because it's the default text capture, which is pretty rubbish, but if you configure the site for reCAPTCHA, that works with form reform. We've got a honeypot and we've got a token, so let's add the honeypot and we'll put it in up here. This is where you have a hidden form field for spammers to fill in, and if anyone puts anything in it, the form gets thrown away. We'll give it an enticing name, tempt the spammers into it. We don't need any behavior on this because it's always hidden. We can also add a concrete security token. We'll add that, and again, we don't need to do anything fancy with it because it just sits there and it's always hidden. Because we're Ajax loading, let's add a spinner to the form. So here we have a spinner. So let's add this. We've got some defaults for it, and we're only going to cover the form. We won't cover the whole page. We've got options here. We can have it in a block, cover the whole window, or just cover the form area. So we'll add the spinner there. Publish our page. Watch carefully because the Ajax is going to be fairly quick. You'll only get a quick look at the spinner while the Ajax goes. And there we have it. A spinner straight to the form submission. Because the form is built out of blocks, well, we can arrange those blocks into tabs, and form reform integrates with Magic Tabs, so you can build a multi-stage form with everything on the page in tabs. You can build multi-stage forms by submitting part of the form at a time and collecting the data either into a database table or into a session or into a cookie, and then in the final step submit the form. You can add custom handlers to a form for your own destination, such as submitting to third-party APIs. We have loads of handlers available. You can save data to the log, you can log various stages of the form submission. We've got an email sender. This isn't designed as a bulk mail system, but if you wanted to create a bulk mail handler, you could use form reform as the front end for it. This is an open and growing form system. There's no real limit to what you can do with it. It's designed for easy extension by adding blocks, by changing block designs, by easily adding form handlers to change how forms are processed and where the data goes and what you do with it. There's extensive documentation on my support site at c5magic.co.uk. Please go and have a browse through the documentation. You'll see the example contact form in many different guises and advice on all the other things you can do with form reform. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.